Hey, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. Episode 5, the Archivist series. And super excited for this one. Um, a person I've been following for years and recently had the pleasure of, I would say, making friends with. And yeah, I couldn't believe I was able to get him on this early in the series, but look forward to this conversation a lot. I don't think I've ever written as many notes or listened to as much material as I have for this person. Yeah, so Nick Hinton, thanks for joining me and welcome.
Thanks for having me, man.
What a pleasure. Yeah, like we mentioned when I first reached out to you, um, I had heard your interview on THC and was just absolutely fascinated. Um, I've been kind of obsessed with Saturn
hmm
for 10 years or more. And kind of as I worked my way into alchemy and understanding what alchemy meant, kind of as a, personal um, life journey, hero's journey concept, and realized how crucial of a role Saturn played, and realized that no one was really talking about it. And your interview came into my life at just such a perfect time, and I was just kind of blown away by the things you were talking about. And yeah, the black monolith, the hive mind, the idea of like co-creation and akashic fields and collective memory, and how all these things kind of were being manipulated or interwoven into pop culture and society. And yeah, um, but I want to know a little bit about you and your background. Um, what led you on this journey? How did it all start?
Yeah, so I've told this story kind of a lot of times, so some people might know, but I basically was raised to believe in kind of whatever I wanted. We weren't raised religious or, there's nothing shoved down our throats. So me and my brother, we had freedom to really just, kind of think what we want. Um, so yeah, I was, because I had no direction, I was just kind of raised an atheist. And we'd go to like church on the holidays, but that was really it. It was more of a tradition than anything else. Um, and so yeah, I was reading books like Stephen Hawking and all that stuff like in high school and middle school, and that's what I was super interested in, was just science, the Big Bang, all that stuff. I think is garbage now, honestly, but it made perfect sense to me at the time. And but there was only so much that science could answer. And I always had the questions of, why is there government? Why is there war? And why is there money? Like those systems didn't make sense to me. And, you know, I would think like, if we're so advanced and so smart, why are we using a broken system? Like that just didn't make sense to me. So it wasn't until I was probably like 15 or 16 that like my friend just randomly showed me a video about the Denver airport. And the Denver airport conspiracy video on YouTube at the time was all about the Illuminati and this whole plan to end the world and blah, 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 blah. And it just completely blew my mind. I was like, okay, this makes perfect sense. Like this, it made me understand why there would be a broken system, because it's on design. It's, it's on purpose and, or by design. And, my friend just randomly showed me it. He didn't really care about it too much. He just thought it was interesting, but I became obsessed. So I started watching everything I possibly could, watching movies like Zeitgeist and um, I can't remember all of them, but there was so much stuff around that time, 2012, the so-called Great Awakening. There's all
Oh
these
yeah.
videos being planted on YouTube at that time. I Pet Goat, I think, was another one of them. Um, but yeah, so after that, I was just obsessed with these things, and I studied all of that stuff for like years and years and years. But it was when I graduated that I started like just getting like mentally and spiritually fatigued by it, because there's all these end of the world dates and all these predictions and nothing was ever coming true. And um Michael Hoffman, I think, puts it perfectly, where he said there's this thing called end times burnout syndrome, where they will literally implant all these false end times prophecies onto the internet and pop culture, whatever, through chaos agents, MK Ultra people like Charles Manson, just to demoralize people. And that's what was happening to me. And so I took like a 3-year break where I just landscaped and worked in a greenhouse and, you know, just didn't think about anything. But eventually I got tired of, you know, working my body to death basically for such a low wage all the time, that I was like, okay, I'm going to get myself into school. So I went to the University of Toledo for 3 years to study philosophy. And it was during that time that I started learning how to construct kind of good arguments, I guess. And that's what led me to revisit all the theories I had studied back then and just like write about them in a more coherent way. And then I was posting them on Reddit, posted them on Twitter. They went viral. And then, you know, I started selling my books. And then I went on some adventures with the people I met through Twitter as, you know, my books were getting popular. And then that led me down some even more insane rabbit holes where, you know, the things that I was writing about, I felt like I kind of became a part of, and it was terrifying. And then I think, you know, I found God through the whole process, honestly. And so I've, for the last like year, maybe 2 years, I've taken a step back just to recalibrate and, yeah, just get closer to God and just enjoy the little things again. I mean, you know, I spent so much time in this psychological labyrinth and didn't really find what I was looking for. I mean, I did in a way, like I found God, but you know, it wasn't what I thought all of this stuff was originally, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. How old a man are you?
I'm 28.
28.
Yeah, that
Yeah,
Saturn
you're
return.
yeah. Yeah. I was actually just talking about that the other day on a divination show. Um, yeah, my oldest son was born when I was 28 and I named him Mason. Um, but yeah, your life echoes mine. My mom was raised Baptist and my father Christian, and they had enough of organized religion, and I was set free on the world,
Hmm.
essentially. It
Hmm.
was kind of difficult as a child, and I'm sure you can relate to this in some ways because it lacked a lot of structure and you had a bunch of questions, and my parents didn't really participate too much in answering these questions. You know, life gives you a lot of questions, but not a lot of answers, right?
Right, right.
But that's kind of the hero's journey essentially, and it's kind of like alchemy essentially. And like you mentioned, when you um, first awaken, or I always like to say, you just become responsible for educating yourself essentially.
Yeah.
That just like the concept of alchemy, you're very Saturnian in the beginning, and you're
Hmm.
led, and you feel really heavy, and you feel like your boots are in the mud. And that's so funny that you had a physical, laborious job
Yeah.
digging in the earth. I think that's incredibly symbolic. And part of your journey led you to studying philosophy. And I think that so many people that echoes. I think your story echoes for so many people, and it's why you become so popular. And what I love so much about your journey as well is that in such a short time, um, you've been open and honest about your evolution, about your opinions and belief. And well, belief is a tricky word, but your opinions, I should say,
Hmm.
your voice. And yeah, fantastic. You just gave me a lot of information I didn't know about you there. So I hadn't heard you say a lot of that before. But when you talk about um, things that have changed, the
Hmm.
opinions that have changed, um, going back to your first book, um, the Saturn time cube.
Yeah.
Fundamentally, what were your most important points or takeaways from that book? If you could just give me like 3 or 4 of them, and
Yes.
maybe
Yeah.
just talk about what has evolved or has been something that's not necessarily that's evolved, but has stayed the same from those books. So maybe things that have changed and things that you still um, think are shaping the reality that we live in.
Okay. Yeah. So when I first wrote that book, um, you know, that was one of the things that I was studying back in high school was that hexagon on top of Saturn. I just always found that fascinating. I was like, why the hell is no one talking about this hexagonal storm on Saturn that scientists apparently don't actually know why it's there? But I ended up finding this super schizo YouTube channel where this guy would just sit at his dinner table with his parrot just cawing in the background, and he's like, people don't pay attention. But he was just ranting about the hexagon. It was the only thing I could find, and he was talking about how it was related to the cube, and Saturn was Kronos, the god of time. And then he was pointing out all the different time cubes or tesseracts in movies, and how the ancients worshipped a giant black cube in honor of Saturn. And yeah, there's a lot that goes into that I've covered extensively
Of course,
before.
yeah.
But so yeah, that me trying to study that, it led to a lot of different things like the black cube shaped quantum computers, D-Wave,
for sure. Gordy Rose.
Yes. And also, I think it is kind of funny they're called D-Wave because like John D and like the Sea of Information, Age of Aquarius stuff. Anyways,
yeah, John D Waves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so yeah, studying those computers and just the different types of technology that are coming out, like and virtual reality and all that stuff, led me to this conclusion that there's going to be some kind of Saturnian hive mind in the future, and something like a metaverse before that was announced. And yeah, so the only thing that's really changed with that is that I was convinced that Saturn was like the Gnostic demiurge and that he ruled this, that we are already in a computer simulation. Like that was where I was kind of lost, at least in my opinion. And that's what's changed. Is now I think that the powers that be, like, it's just so funny to me that people will watch Hollywood movies and in the same breath, they will say Hollywood's full of liars and deceivers and sorcerers. But oh yeah, the Truman Show, the Matrix, that's the truth. That's how we get out of here. So like, I just don't believe that anymore. That's the impression I was under, is that, yeah, we're in the Saturnian matrix. We're trying to escape. But I think that's kind of like this disillusioned, disassociated state they want us to be in.
Absolutely.
And yes,
we're in this kind of soup that is full of shit and we don't have a lot of control over it.
Right.
You feel like you kind of do have control, and that reality or life is what you make of it, essentially.
In which view? What do you?
Well, do you think you have control over how you feel about life, God, your relationship with both, right?
To an extent, but I mean, what I
or
believe.
Do you still feel like this is a simulation of sorts, and reality as we know it is a bit of a construct?
I mean, it's definitely a construct. I mean, our brains definitely play a role in how how we interact with, I mean, just our perspective, how we interact with life, what we deem as real and what is not real, and whatever social reality, all that kind of stuff. Like our minds are definitely like kind of like a computer, right? But no, I just don't view the universe anymore as some sort of simulation and some kind of like clockwork machine, right? I just think it's a dead view of the universe.
Absolutely. So I guess what I was trying to get at is that you feel humankind plays a co-creative part in the sort of black cube AI subject matter.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that the black cube stuff, we created it inadvertently. I think that there's been some kind of like, I've talked about the mind virus in a few other podcasts, but it seems that a lot of these scientists are actually just modern day alchemists, and they are channeling this information from somewhere else. And I don't think they even know it, but they are actually building the demiurge without knowing it.
Yeah. And you've heard me talk a lot about the lodestone. How do you feel that's related to the cube? Do you feel it's related?
I mean, would you say the cube is the lodestone?
I would.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So I don't know much about it, but you can expand on it to just for my sake.
Sure. Yeah. So this is probably one of my favorite subjects, and like we were mentioning earlier, off air, and I'll bring Julian Jaynes into this, and we'll just touch lightly on it. Julian Jaynes had the theory that 2,000-3,000 years ago, the majority of mankind, if not all of it, was getting all of their physical commands from an audio hallucination, which they considered to be God.
Mm-hmm.
You could call it the voice of God. And we can tie this into some of the patents and the AI and the electronic manipulation that's going on today, because there is a patent called the voice of God, which
Yep.
I think I've heard you speak on. And essentially that some event happened and people no longer could hear the voice of God. And so they were clamoring to replace this voice with something because they were lost. And this is where idol worship and the church as we know it today, the priest class, people telling, look, follow me because I still hear the voices,
Mm-hmm.
right? And the transition period kind of started there. And I would say, just like you've seen 2001 A Space Odyssey, I'm sure, right?
Yes.
Just like when the monolith hits the ground, right? The black cube, although it's a rectangle, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah. Yeah.
The apes, they start going crazy and killing each other, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I hypothesize, and Julian Jaynes says a similar thing, that Eden, as we know it, or the age of innocence, or the golden age of Saturn, was the
Mm-hmm.
time before where we still had the audio hallucinations, because everyone, there was no introspection, there was no greed, the seven sins and all these things they didn't exist, because every single thing they did, sleep, eat, drink, pray, was an audio hallucination given to them from within themselves. And that through maybe a cataclysmic event or something like that, or the arrival, as I've postulated before, of the lodestone.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Um,
Have you ever noticed that when the lodestone or the monolith arrives, it's also when they're killing each other, they start using tools, right? They start picking
correct,
up bones and stuff to hit each other.
correct. Yeah,
And that monkey tosses that bone up in the air, and then the screen transitions into a rotating space station. So yeah, it's
boom,
just the introduction of tools and technology
technology, boom.
that caused the fall. Yeah.
Fantastic transition right there, because I want to get into the technology. And you've mentioned, and I think it's directly related, that the lodestone took over the auditory hallucinations, because the lodestone became a worshipped stone. It's known by a million names, the Omphale stone, so on and so forth. And the first king of Atlantis was a lodestone. And the reason why so many of these cities were built in the shape of Atlantis with concentric rings,
Mm-hmm.
like Saturn's rings, was because of the lodestone as a symbol. So the lodestone was symbolized as the monad. You're familiar with the symbol, right? The
Yeah.
dot
Yeah.
inside the circle.
Mm-hmm.
And you could think of that like the impregnation of a cell, because when the sperm enters the egg, it creates the monad as the sperm starts to divide
Right.
within the cell. And like you were stating, tech, tools, um, I think they have a similar starting point. And what I also want to get into, even though we're going to kind of jump away from that just for a second, we'll come back to it, is how introspection, and the word I want to use is hyperstition, um, revelation of the method. What do those words mean to you?
Well, introspection is just thinking about what you think about, right? I mean, that's how I
The
define it.
analog self, right? You're
Yeah.
aware, you're
Yeah.
pondering the world, you're thinking about yourself in the world, how you equate, like you were talking about as a child and becoming an adult. Your parents had no religion, you didn't have a lot of boundaries, just like I didn't, which
Mm-hmm.
at times can feel kind of lonely,
Yeah. Lost at
kind of
sea.
lost.
Mm-hmm.
But then you're allowed to go through this hero's journey, as Joseph Campbell would put it, or this alchemical journey, you know, transmuting yourself, these
Mm-hmm.
different stages allegorically and metaphorically of evolution as a person. And how the word hyperstition, I just love this word and I've heard you use it before, and the revelation of the method, how those work when it comes to taking information and producing the reality you live in, or that we all live in.
Okay, so I'll explain two views of revelation of the method.
Please.
My first view was um, that the revelation of the method was completely real. Like everyone says, it's like this karmic loophole that the powers that be use. And also, I felt it was a clever way to kind of turn us into like reality generators for the reality that they want. Because when you're going through all of their movies and their literature and whatever, and you're decoding stuff, right? You are becoming the decryptor. And what happens when you decrypt a program? You activate it.
Correct.
So I was thinking that maybe we were playing a part. We are all like the whole conspiracy community is becoming agents in the apocalypse, right? We're becoming
Right.
agents of the apocalypse by tearing down the veil for them.
Yeah, becoming magicians
Yeah,
essentially.
yeah. And so I still kind of think there's something to that, but ultimately this whole revelation of the method thing is just coming straight out of the magician's literature and stuff. So
Chaos magic.
yeah, it's just all chaos magic stuff. So I mean, it could be complete bullshit, to be honest. And
Yeah.
um I do think that a lot of this stuff is being revealed on purpose, and they are using us to reveal it. That's still something I think is a fact, but
Okay.
the whole reason for that would be to pretty much orchestrate a controlled demolition of the deep state, the satanic dark cabal, whatever you want to call it. Because
Okay.
we were talking about off air, it's a world stage, right? You have the black and white checkerboard. This is how
Yes.
Hermeticism works. You have to um polarize the opposites and then synthesize them. So we're literally watching the whole world become polarized right now. You have the schizo conspiracy theorists, they take pride in calling each other schizos and stuff. And then you have the dumb normies who are all, you know, injected with stuff and crazy. This is the view that is being given to us, right? We're being socially engineered into these two camps. And so I feel,
Polarized.
huh? Yeah,
Polarized.
yeah. And we're being radicalized as well because we don't even get along with these other people. We live in two separate realities almost. It's hard to communicate with the other side. But like I said, I think this is all being socially engineered on purpose. I don't think we're actually that freaking smart. We've been purposely placed in these echo chambers where we're allowed to have these discussions, right? Like these electronic echo chambers, we're all learning this stuff, and it's not being censored as much as people think. I mean, there's certain things, but that feels like reverse psychology to me. It's like, oh yeah, you're on the
I
right track.
agree.
Look at all the pushback.
Yeah.
But if
Yeah,
they
I
really wanted
agree.
to put a stop to it, they would. So, anyways, the whole idea, I think, is to eventually introduce a situation that vindicates all the conspiracy theorists. The old system is completely destroyed, similar to how the Twin Towers were, controlled demolition
Hmm.
as a ritual
Right.
to
Two
introduce a completely new system,
two
a
into
light
one.
one. Yeah, yeah.
Hmm. Yeah. This is kind of what I was talking about with the breakdown of the bicameral mind. I think the Twin Towers were a ritual
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
along the same lines
Mm-hmm.
because, as you already know, the two towers became one. And what else
Mm-hmm.
is right outside the tower but the black cube, the inverted cube,
Right.
right?
Right. Which is the
Um,
tesseract, right? Which would be the
exactly.
fusing the third dimension with the fourth dimension.
Exactly. Yeah. Matter and the transition into the next.
Mm-hmm.
And that's also symbolic and metaphorical to the breakdown of the bicameral mind. Because since we talked about the monad and the lodestone in the 1700s, 1600s, they were postulating that the lodestone was a living deity
Yeah.
on a actual scientific level. They were saying that the two poles, the opposing magnetic fields that create the torus,
Mm-hmm.
um, is what imparts consciousness, and that the event, whatever it was, that caused the end of the bicameral mind or the period to losing the auditory hallucination, which from there through language became introspection and all of these things. Discussing what we're talking about here today would be would be so important because going from one god or whatever the there could have been multiple gods in different areas. I don't know exactly. Julian James didn't know. But to having a society kind of like both of our childhood where you could have a person who is literally on their own path,
Mm-hmm.
either you kind of talked about the two polarizing segments of America. You got the schizo conspiracy theorist and you got the normies.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this goes back to what you were also talking about with the Matrix. and that's kind of a play on this as well. The red pill or the blue pill. I don't want
Yeah,
I don't want
yeah.
either pill,
Right.
right? And narrow is the path, right? You talk about God and the Bible, and I just love the allegories of the Bible. There's so many amazing ones, and I think narrow is the path is a key one.
Hmm.
I have a quote of Buddha on my arm that says, "I seek my own enlightenment for the sake of everyone else, or for the sake of all beings."
Hmm.
And I think it's important to not polarize yourself to either spectrum, right? Wouldn't you agree?
Oh yeah, 100%.
Yeah, and that perhaps part of what I was asking you about when we first started talking was about your journey and your transitions through your books. Is that I do feel like you've kind of left a camp or a polarized edge of this global conspiracy, whatever you want to call it, and
Hmm.
you've kind of found yourself in this nice middle ground. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, yeah, I think so too. And you talked about revelation method, and I couldn't agree with you more. I think there are a lot of tricks being played,
Oh
and
yeah.
that's why I was saying having someone. I think what I related to you with the most, and having listened to like just about every piece of content I could find online that you were speaking on, is that you leave camps. Like in the beginning of the conspiracy world or conspiracy thing, where you start to look into things for yourself. Like I was mentioning with alchemy and Saturn, that it's like really heavy. You feel heavy and dense and kind of depressed and dark,
Hmm.
and you're just walking around in the mud, and you had that job digging in the
Yeah,
earth.
yeah.
And then you can go way to the other end of the spectrum, and I'm sure you can relate to me here, where you get these new agers that are the same thing.
Right,
They're
right.
way on the other end of the spectrum,
Yeah, just floating in space,
and you
talking to
can't even
aliens.
you find they're just as hard to relate to
Yeah,
as a normie who's saying follow this, do this. They have almost no. They're all groupthink. They're all hive mind.
yeah, yeah. Just
They
CNN.
yeah. What would you say is one of the leading factors keeping these two camps separated? Would you say that it's these chaos magicians,
Yeah, dude. I think it's Discordianism all the way down.
Discordianism? Okay, and
Yeah, I think the shadow government, I think the real shadow government is all. So who was the first intelligence agent, right? It was John D.
yeah,
You're familiar
100%.
with that concept, right?
007, of
Yeah,
course.
yeah. 007. He was astro projecting, gathering intelligence for the Queen.
Hmm.
And yeah, so I really believe that the real shadow government is all these different intelligence agencies that are just battling together and also working together, and they have no idea what they're even doing because it's all compartmentalized, right?
Of course,
But the same way that a
they're parts
MK,
of the whole, and they're
yeah.
blind, just like so. Joseph Campbell's explanation of the dark counterplayer,
Hmm.
which has some overlays with Gnosticism and the demiurge, but I don't like. They have overlays, but they're not the same. Is that you have the same thing, right? That just like a chessboard, and since you mentioned the checkerboard, I
Hmm.
think chess is like a great example of our life
Yeah, yeah.
or the life we're living in. You have God, and then you have the dark counterplayer. The dark counterplayer, um,
I would say Lucifer and Satan are doing this play, but yeah, I
right,
mean, I understand what you're saying.
and that um, the dark counterplayer is blind,
Hmm.
the blind God. He has his job, he's performing his role, right? But
Yeah.
essentially, he's playing a losing game because he's the blind God, and ultimately, God knows all the plays on the chessboard, right? Because he created the chessboard.
Hmm.
Would you
Well, I
agree
mean,
with?
honestly, I think that the sorcerers at the top created the chessboard as a kind of, all these cities and all these like weird. You know how Twilight language seems to be encoded in everything, every single city, every
Of course.
single. So like it seems that they set up
By Twilight
the
language,
entire
would you mean like Enochian kind of, or
Twilight language, meaning like the weird associations between places, like the place names, or I forget how Michael Hoffman describes it, but there seems to be like some weird sorcery or like quantum entanglement between places, the names, the events that happen there,
agreed?
and the architecture, whatever. But what I was going to say before is that
Holographic,
yeah,
essentially.
yeah, like a holographic language. Yeah, so it would be Enochian. They're
Yeah,
just doing it in 3D right now.
absolutely.
Um, so what I was going to say earlier though is that yeah, the real shadow government seems to be all these competing but cooperating intelligence agencies because the same way you have like an MK Ultra person, they have a fractured mind. They say that it needs to be honeycombed, right? Well, the same way a honeycombed person's mind has all these different memories that they can't access.
Mm-hmm.
I think the structure of the shadow government is honeycombed as well, and
Okay, I agree.
they're all being seduced and allured by the queen bee to do. They're guided to do
Absolutely.
exactly what they're supposed to do by this mysterious spirit, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the same way that an evil queen would, cause chaos amongst her people and cause them to fight over her. I think she does that for her own pleasure as well.
Yeah, well, to keep a honest hive society, there has to be not only segmentation and augmentation, but some form of rivalry between the groups,
Mm-hmm.
because it's kind of like the Hegelian dialectic, right?
Mm-hmm.
Wouldn't you agree? Keep the people fighting amongst themselves.
Yeah.
And this goes back to what we were saying about the lodestone and 2001: A Space Odyssey, but kind of blown up to a
Mm-hmm.
larger perspective. And I agree with you 100% about the cities. Years and years ago, when I was doing the radio show, Radio Tartary, which we'll get into Tartary here in a little bit, I was reading a lot about Bell Labs.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
The Lucis Trust and all the things they were involved with. And I remember reading in a book that a lot of the Bell Labs, they were like the first people to start patenting nanotechnology. And get this, they said that what inspired their obsession with nanotechnology was Kublai Khan's Circuit City, or the Grand City of Peking, and that it was a living circuit.
Mm.
And these cities were called circuit cities. And similar to your concept of the computer and the black cube and the D wave, right?
Mm-hmm.
That perhaps, again, going back through different ages, that these living cities, and I talked about this with Juan on my episode with Juan that just came out the other day, that these cities we were a hive collective in a kind of circuited computer city, feeding a egregore,
Yeah.
essentially. And I agree that all these different cities were honeycombed and compartmentalized, and it goes to one source, like you were talking about the queen bee. I just love that, and that's why the beehive symbol is so prominent with all of these royals, monarchies.
And the queen bee would just be Eris, the goddess of discord, who the
Yes.
Discordians worship, who were, literally writing books about the Illuminati, completely exposing everything about the Illuminati. So why would they be doing that, right?
Yeah.
Revelation of the method, what we just talked about. But yeah, so I do think that all of these cities are feeding the same thing. It's like money and commerce, that's like the life force of this machine. And I think it's all being allowed to do what it does just to create, to create more efficiency, right? Like we're trying to become the most efficient society possible, which ultimately, the only logical end of that is like the singularity event, right? The creation of some kind of AI. So I think that's why America was invented in the first place, like this experiment in capitalism and democracy or whatever. That's why it had the free market. And it was the new Atlantis, right? Francis Bacon. It's all to create this, to be the catalyst for this AI.
Yeah.
Because capitalism is obsessed with efficiency. And, that's what we're seeing today is, oh, well, we have all this money and we want things faster and better and cheaper. And so we'll just make robots do it. So it's all been on this linear progression ever since the fall of the original Babel.
Yeah, I want to get into Babel since we're talking about Bacon. We're talking about New Atlantis. Let's jump on the Babel train for a little bit, because you made some interesting relations, and you're connecting the dots through Tartaria. I kind of want to have that be our segment into that. Can we go ahead and jump into that?
Yeah.
Give me your opinions on Babel and CERN and how they're related, if they are, in your opinion.
Okay, so in the Bible, the Tower of Babel was, I don't know if it's metaphorical or whatever, but, supposedly it was this almost like a portal to heaven, right? These people were building this tower to heaven. And the only reason it was even possible is because they all spoke one language. And so the Bible says that because because they all spoke one language, anything they imagined was possible to them. So they thought to go to war with God, kill him, usurp his throne, take over the universe. And
Have you
so
seen the movie The Dark Tower?
that is that Stephen King?
Oh, I don't
Is
know
it?
who wrote it, but it was a movie with Matthew McConaughey.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
You've seen
That
it?
I haven't seen it, but it's based on Stephen King's like Dark Tower
Yeah,
series.
but you're familiar with the series then, because I'm not.
A
So,
little bit, but yeah, I'm familiar. The basic concepts.
since we were talking about chaos magic and magicians and like wizards and warlocks and these kind of concepts of two opposing magnetic forces, perhaps being represented in through these, manipulation of mankind, hive mind. Do you think Babel could have been kind of like a Eye of Sauron of sorts?
Yeah, yeah. I think it was like a Dark Tower or like a Eye of Sauron.
Yeah,
And so, because these people were trying to build this tower to heaven and kill God or whatever, God changes all their language, scatters them about, destroys the tower. And I think we've been slowly trying to rebuild this tower ever since.
I agree.
And basically, yeah, CERN, the way it relates, in my opinion, is, we were just talking about that newspaper article where the scientists straight up nicknamed it Babel. But it's not only that. The thing that's like really significant to me is the fact that CERN is where the World Wide Web was created, right?
Right.
And
Yeah.
so the World Wide
Communication
Web,
between different science centers all over Europe, right?
yeah, and the World Wide Web is literally the catalyst for the hive mind, the Internet of Things. It's also allowing us all to speak kind of one language, right? You can translate things almost instantly. But not only that, the philosophers were looking for the language of the birds, right? The language of the fallen angels, the birds, and also called the green language. Well, what is the green language? I would say probably computer code, like in the Matrix. You see the green
what is
ones
it,
and zeros
WAN
falling.
and GAN?
I
There are
have no
two types
idea.
of computer code. I believe it's WAN and GAN,
I've heard of
GANW.
GAN. Yeah.
Yeah, and one's like kind of a dark counterplayer, self evolution, and the other one's kind of communal.
Oh yeah, so that's in the extended intelligence community. Were you like diving into that? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or no, Goon and GAN.
Thank you.
Yes.
I knew I was close.
Yeah, yeah.
But one's about like kind of building itself, like a
One's about like
collective.
infinite games.
Exactly.
Yeah, one's like playing an infinite game with itself or something.
Exactly. One's like a continual evolution, and the other one's about like destroying everything in its path. Kind of like kind of like a cancer or
yeah. Well, it's just like the movies. There's always the evil AI and the one that becomes sentient and self-aware. And it's like, I'm here to help.
Yeah.
But that's just the Luciferian and satanic Hegelian dialectic again, in my opinion. But sorry, I had a thought, but I forgot.
Well, I am kind of hopping you around to different places, but I want.
Oh, I remembered. I don't know if this is super off topic, but I kind of think that part of this revelation of the method stuff, what it's done in these electronic echo chambers, like I was saying earlier, is it's created a glass bead game. I feel a lot of us are just constantly collecting information and connecting it to other things and other things and other things, and it just never ends. And it really doesn't affect the outside world. So like for people that aren't familiar with the glass bead game, it's a concept from that Herman Hesse book where basically there's all these like scholars who are living in an ivory tower and they are just playing this impossible game, but supposedly reach enlightenment. And it feels like that's what a lot of people are doing. We're all trying to win the glass bead game to reach enlightenment, but I don't think the game ever ends. It's an infinite game.
How do you compare yourself to that then?
How do I where do I see myself in the game?
Yeah. Do you consider yourself a player in that game, or
I'm on my way out, to be honest?
Yeah, like that's what I meant earlier about. I think that game is polarizing. It's the concept of the game is that you're trying to be a winner, and this life isn't about winning. Would you agree?
Well, yeah, and this research has been weaponized in a weird way because it's been gamified, right? You win nice shiny gold coins, from whoever has the best research, right? And everyone wants to be the smartest or the first person to report on something. Like, it is a weird glass bead game.
Yeah, yeah, and you mentioned echo chambers, and I think they exist in every form of expression, art, science, religion. That's just part of the nature of the beast, right? That, and I agree that we're all being used. Life, this world is a stage, essentially, and we all are kind of actors in our own way.
Yeah.
And mentioning again the dark counterplayer, the blind god, the kind of jester symbolism that's everywhere and has been forever. And I think the jester represents the polarization, right? That the people that go to each end of the spectrum are kind of the jester. The schizo, crypto, conspiracy people, that think because they have some tiny grasp on maybe sacred or hidden knowledge at the esoteric, that they're somehow better than the people on the other end of that polarizing worldview. And how we're all being, like you said, pushed away from each other. And do you feel like that there is any positive end to this? That I know you think that
Not if you don't believe in God. It's not a very it's not a very happy outlook.
Yeah, and I want to touch, since we're here, Atlantis and New Atlantis. Maybe your own opinions about Bacon's opinions, or what is it? What is Atlantis symbolic of to you, or the New Atlantis, America?
Well, yeah, I just think Atlantis was another version of the Tower of Babel.
I agree. Yeah, like I said, the original god of Atlantis was the lodestone.
Yeah, and so once the world was supposedly flooded and everything, and that thing was destroyed, like I said, I feel that there's been that seducing spirit still lingering in the world, just kind of guiding people around through synchronicities and supernatural things, and kind of like enticing scientists, sorcerers, whatever, to rebuild this thing, put all the moving parts back together.
Yeah,
like they're channeling this information from another source.
Yeah,
and I think it's the remains.
Tower, like you said, is a great metaphor for that.
John Keel actually, if you read the book The Eighth Tower, he kind of talks about this idea that some ancient supercomputer, like the remains of some ancient supercomputer, seems to be the source of all paranormal phenomenon. He didn't think that there was like UFOs and Bigfoot and Loch Ness monsters and all that stuff separately. He thought they were all kind of like holographic beings. They were like tricksters. They were like fool. It was like the trickster archetype, right? Kind of leading people into the abyss, like white rabbits. You go down the rabbit hole and then you come back with all this information, and in some weird way, it's all been used to do exactly what we're doing now.
Manipulate? Is that what you mean?
Yeah. Just putting people on a path.
Okay, get them off their own individual path. Steer the subconscious, essentially.
Yes, exactly. It's like the treasure hunter who, goes into the abyss looking for all these riches, and he accidentally opens up a cursed tomb and regrets it and changes forever.
The pirate symbolism is so.
So that's what I feel like every mystery hunter or mystery seeker is actually kind of being enticed into doing. Even scientists, they are opening Pandora's box with this CERN stuff, right? Through their own hubris, their pride, their arrogance, and this idea of progress and advancement, right? It's leading people astray. And it's just like the forbidden knowledge all over again. That's our downfall.
Yeah. And I think that's so interesting too, because part of me feels like these societies, or the cabal, whatever you want to call them, that I think perhaps they still have this voice of God, and they're the shepherd archetype, and because they have this voice of God and they're being led, kind of like you were saying with the scientists at CERN, that they're doing X, Y, and Z, but they're not really understanding, or they're not perhaps lucid to their actions.
I mean, have you ever seen a quantum equation? You got to be kind of insane to understand that.
Well, absolutely. Not only that, when you study the mathematicians and you realize that almost every large mathematical evolution came to a person through some drug-induced, or
Yeah.
dreamlike state.
Yeah. So just to back up my point a bit, I mean, Seymour Cray, creator of the first supercomputer,
Yep.
he was digging tunnels in his backyard talking to elves who were
Mm-hmm.
helping him build these things, apparently.
Yeah.
And then even Edward Haley, is that the guy who discovered Haley's Comet?
I can't remember his
I
first name.
think that's his name. But anyways, that guy, he was also a little bit crazy. And he said that an elf crawled in through his window and told him, hey, go ask the Rockefellers for funding to build this telescope. And then he did that. And then he got the funding and built like a legendary telescope we still use today. So it's like, yeah, a lot of the inspiration behind this so-called progress and advancement is supernatural. It's still like technology is just sorcery, in my opinion. It's just it's just through a modern lens that we're seeing it, and we're so desensitized to it we don't realize that we're using black mirrors all day, like John D was.
Absolutely, yeah. I posted a ton on Queen Elizabeth and her obsession with the black mirror and collecting the Aztec and Mayan black mirrors. The Olmecs were using them.
Yeah, and if the black mirror, or if CERN, is the place where the World Wide Web was created, and if CERN really is creating mini black holes or whatever, you could compare it to the biblical bottomless pit, right? The abyss. And so if we are looking at black mirrors that are connected to CERN, with the World Wide Web all day, we're literally just staring into the abyss all the time. And we're all going crazy.
Yeah.
The internet has literally increased the amount of mental illness in so many different ways in the world today. And that's not even profound. Like everyone knows that.
Yeah, and this kind of goes back to the hive mind and the voice of God and Julian Jaynes, and that he says that when the breakdown period began, everyone was schizo, and because no one had guidance anymore. And the reference I've made now three or four times about our childhoods being very similar, and that I felt very alone. I looked at the world different than almost everybody. I felt like an outsider. I think maybe you relate to that.
Yeah.
And I had depression. I mean, it wasn't like anything horrible, but socially, I was incredibly socially awkward. I have always been incredibly introspective, and I can absolutely leave my physical body and be in my head, to the detriment of people around me or my own responsibilities, as a father and as a husband. It's a blessing and a curse at the same time. But it shows you kind of the dichotomy of what we're dealing with here. And like I had mentioned earlier, that perhaps these dark counterplayers, the cabal, that I think they are a part of that hive mind that we've been removed from.
Oh, yeah.
And keep like the sheep and the shepherd. We're the sheep, obviously. And the concept of the black sheep is the person that's responsible and self-aware, and they're not there's no red pill or blue pill. They're avoiding all of these trips, these hazards, that even the concept of self-realization and kind of on the path to enlightenment or wisdom or whatever you want to call it. Obviously wisdom is what you do with the information, and like you said, it's kind of they already have control of the hive, but how they manipulate the people that have removed themselves from the hive, right? The higher IQ, the more introspective people. I think there are probably two different segments of the population. Wouldn't you agree that there are people that have already...
Yeah. I mean, this plays exactly into what I was kind of talking about earlier. Like so, a lot of the people who are deep into the Tartaria stuff, like, I said, I think it's another version of Atlantis, right? Well,
I agree.
But a lot of the people that are studying it right now claim it's a breakaway civilization. Well, that's still the same thing, right? In a way, because all of these intelligence agencies, the people that were studying the original Babylonian magic and stuff like that, so what I'm trying to get at is one of the original breakaway civilizations that people are talking about now is like, the airship club. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Nimza?
Yeah, Nimza. It was made up of German nationalists. And then some people say that, the CIA and NASA in and of itself is a breakaway civilization that infiltrated America during Operation Paperclip. Okay. Well, these are all still extensions of people believing the same crap from Atlantis, right? like the Nazis, who are literally sorcerers, occultists, right?
Yeah.
Who created our intelligence agencies. They were seeking Shambhala, Shangri-La, the blue skinned people underground, trying to find enlightenment and stuff. So like they were literally playing a huge part in creating this Tower of Babel again, bringing back the breakaway civilization, while also, I feel like America has been at war with itself ever since the introduction of the CIA. Like, like,
Yeah, I mean, CIA, they're like the epitome of the chaos agent, right?
yeah, exactly. So, like, legitimate governments have been at war with the intelligence agencies since they were introduced, and I think that's why we see so many MK Ultra like shooters, bombers. The MK Ultra owned or the CIA owned media, just causing division in the country, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah, and I like to think of the CIA, obviously, as I've already, don't want to be a broken record, but I think they're under the same hive mind control. I think that we've been kind of
exactly.
putting our finger on here that the um, even though there was a fall from the voice of God, and this could be related to Babel, absolutely, because the augmentation of language that perhaps the pre-Babel times was this singular voice of God, and that the Tartaria, Atlantis, these are just hive mind groups. Because the hardest thing people have to wrap their mind around is how are they building these amazing things? Well, these people still had the voice of God. It just wasn't perhaps the original God, the pre-Babel God, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this is where idols and loadstones and sacrifice all kind of worked their way in. That you had different groups, like you were saying, these different, relating again to circuit cities and the honeycomb effect.
Mm-hmm.
That they still lead to the same um, queen,
Exactly.
essentially.
But dude, it's Mystery Babylon. I think it's a perfect name because it's a mystery to the people that are even fucking, involved in the mystery schools. They have no idea what's going on. They all worship different gods, but it all is the same stuff.
Right. I
But
agree.
that's how she operates. Is it's a kingdom divided against itself. It's full of discord and confusion because that's the only way it'll
I
work.
agree.
If
Yeah.
they knew
Yeah.
what they were doing, they would be like, "Holy crap! I quit my job tomorrow."
Yeah. Yeah. The chaos agent, the chaos magician, of
Yeah.
course. Sauron, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, the quickest way to destroy a people is to divide them from within.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that begins with knowledge, like we've talked about with the polarization of specifically America. Since we're both Americans, we could talk about it to the best degree.
Mm-hmm.
But that it was designed this way, and I tend to agree with you there. And this goes back to Bacon's New Atlantis, and that the foundations of America were built around this premise. And
Well,
yeah,
yeah. Even the first Civil War, I believe, there's some evidence to suggest this, but even the first Civil War, which I think we're coming up to a second one, but the first one may have been orchestrated by a group called the Knights of the Golden Circle, who were Templars, Masons, KKK people,
hmm,
basically precursors to Nazis. So America's literally always been a country divided. It's always been red states versus blue states, and now it's just like, I don't know, I guess okay government officials versus CIA owned people. But like it's kind of always been this way because I think it is, like Bacon said, the catalyst for the New World Order. It will be the phoenix that destroys itself and rises again. And we have a phoenix on our dollar. The Nazis had a phoenix on their flag, the eagle.
hmm,
And the phoenix was a symbol in Egypt, right? And Egypt was supposedly a colony of Atlantis. So it all goes back to this ancient mystery religion.
I agree.
And
Yeah,
everyone seeking the mystery almost becomes possessed by it. And they're just doing, yeah, like you said, it works like a hive mind.
hmm, yeah. It's funny because I feel like obviously I have some skin in the game. My name is Ben, and my nickname is Ben, and my birthday is July 2nd, which is the exact apex or capstone of the calendar. There's 182 days from the 1st of January on the left, and then there's 182 days until the end of December on my right.
Is that
And
like that Lionsgate time?
similar,
Okay.
similar. I'm 11 days removed from um, the solstice. Um, and I've been, obviously, you've heard me talk about Janus
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and portals and gateways and Janus and Cernunnos, which is where CERN gets his name from the Celtic god Cernunnos,
Right.
who
The
was
horn
also
god.
the horn god, but he's king of doorways and portals,
Of course.
of course.
Why wouldn't he be?
Why wouldn't he be? And we mentioned it lightly, but I want to get a little more into the concept of CERN being a stage prop, space as well being a stage prop, and kind of go, since we're on the Nazi stuff already, kind of work NASA and CERN and space, because we've said they're related. I
Yeah.
kind of want to go down that rabbit hole a little bit. Do you really believe they have a large hadron collider and they're colliding, atoms together, or do you believe that this is more? I mean, maybe they are doing that. Perhaps it's
hmm
both. Often
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
both.
yeah.
With chaos magic, it's both.
Well, yeah, because you have the rockets shooting up in the sky, right? They're just
Right.
not going to the freaking moon. Like, I'm
Yeah,
sorry,
and
that's
that's what
not
I
happening.
wanted to exactly. That's where I wanted to go with this. Kind of what I was talking about, your evolution of your concepts of this reality. Um, do you really believe now that they were sending ships to Saturn, or do you believe that they were steering
No, no,
subconscious?
I think that picture of Saturn with the hexagon on top is probably fake.
I agree. Yeah, 100%.
And yeah, so the whole idea that, you have the killing of the king ritual with Kennedy, right?
Right.
And that was an Osiris ritual, right?
Right.
So then you have the phallus of America, Florida, where the Kennedy Space Center is, and then they launch a phallus
Yep.
at the sky, the sky goddess. It's all a moonchild ritual, in my
Okay.
opinion.
I
They're
agree.
trying to, yeah, it's like this, and the moonchild, in my opinion, I think is going to be like some kind of transhumanist AI. It's like the Star Child from 2001: Space Odyssey, right? He goes through the black cube and transcends time and shoots
Yep.
off into hyperspace and all that nonsense.
Yep. He goes
Um,
through a portal is all that means.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that's what they're ritualistically representing with all of this stuff. But with the CERN, yeah, I think CERN is something similar. It's, probably a bit, some UFO people, they talk about stagecraft, how they will literally use fake UFOs just to create a ruckus and then create this narrative around it. And, like we were talking about earlier, hyperstition, it kind of plays into that,
Yeah, I
which,
agree.
which, just a quick explanation. It's like, well, my idea of hyperstition is that it's an idea that wills itself into reality. It's like a mind virus, right?
Yeah.
So there's these ideas that come to people, kind of what we've been talking about this whole time, like information that's channeled. And then the minute people put pen to paper and put this idea into the zeitgeist, and
Comes to
people act on
fruition.
it, yeah, it comes to fruition.
Hmm.
So it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy, except it happens on a mass scale and no one even really thought of it. But anyways, I think these narratives are, it's part of the stage show, it's part of the illusion, it's part of the magic. And so people believe these narratives, and they don't have to be real for it to affect the social reality, right? It
Right. Of
doesn't, you don't
course.
even need manifestation, you just need everyone to believe something, and then the social reality is affected by that.
The fabric of reality is manipulated and created, co-created
Mm-hmm.
by us, by our
Mm-hmm.
conscious. And the concept again, like we were saying, that perhaps it's twofold. Perhaps CERN is a real lab where they are doing these real experiments.
Well, yeah,
But
so
I think you would agree with me that it's more about the psychological.
yeah, sorry. So what I was going to say is I think CERN is something similar to a stagecraft, like in the
Right.
UFO community. So
I
it's
agree.
like this big stage prop, like we were saying. It's
Hmm.
this huge hunk of metal. They might be shooting beams of particles back and forth at each other, but the whole idea is to convince all the conspiracy theorists that are watching movies, like, look, the truth is in the movie. CERN is a portal into another world. It's like,
And then they're
no,
creating these.
yeah. Well, the
Hmm.
portal is the World Wide Web,
Right.
and the changing of the timelines is literally as simple as CERN being like, hey, we're gonna change some historical fact on the entire World Wide Web and change everyone's history. And if
Mm.
people, and electromagnetic frequencies can change memories. So we don't have to be shifting through timelines for us to have a memory that doesn't match up with what's on the internet.
Yeah. Yeah. And
So,
this is why um, off air we had talked about Philip K. Dick
mm-hmm,
and why I love him so much. He talked a lot about orthogonal time, which he referenced the Bible and Jesus when he was saying the kingdom of God is perhaps not within you but around you or among you. and that kind of like you're saying that perhaps these these different worlds or realms um, are drawing that perhaps we're pulling things in from them.
Yeah, yeah. And you know, Philip K. Dick, I love his idea of consensus reality.
Yeah,
Because like I said, you don't even need some kind of magical manifestation
right,
to
right,
change reality. You just need to change consensus reality through narrative
exactly.
weaving and storytelling.
Yeah,
And that's what CERN is doing,
yeah,
or the people studying it at least. And the more they decrypt the symbolism, the more they activate the code that makes people really believe this. You know what I mean?
yeah, yeah. So in space, in rockets, like you mentioned, and we had talked about early on in the show, where the location, the name of the city, these kind of holographic representations of magic, essentially, you know, kind of impregnating themselves in the holographic realms or the fourth dimensional realms,
Yeah.
and space and NASA, um, their role in that is the same as CERN, essentially. And I agree with you with the rockets. And I mean, look at Elon Musk. You know, what are
Yeah.
your, you know, give me a quick little opinion of Elon Musk. You know, look at his rockets. I mean, they were the most blatantly phallic looking rockets I'd ever seen.
Oh yeah. And in interviews, he straight up says, "I literally designed my rocket off the movie The Dictator." So this dude
Okay.
is literally just
I
yeah,
didn't know that. Yeah.
yeah. This dude is just. I mean, did you see the thing where people were comparing him to the main character of Deuce X? I think it's called.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And then he commented on it. He acknowledged it, but it's literally a video game about a Illuminati double agent cyborg who saves people from a government made virus. It's like, yeah, it's just crazy. So he is like kind of a tool of the revelation of the method in a way. He's initiating people into this whole Truman Show like reality where nothing's real, everyone's an actor, and blah blah blah.
Yeah. And I think there is some truth to that. I think as we
Oh, for
were,
sure. Yeah, there is.
yeah, yeah. But it's not the whole truth,
Right, because
essentially.
it's
Right.
disempowering if you stop there.
Yeah, yeah, and this is what I again we were touching on with the polarity aspects of you know, camps and religion and politics and all these things is just division,
Hmm.
and that you find the most peace not only with God or the understanding of God in this realm. Perhaps again, you'll never truly understand it, I suppose, but knowing that the key to it all is to not be in any camp, wouldn't you
Right.
say?
Yeah, yeah.
Except for, you know, that there is purpose, wouldn't you agree, to your life?
Oh,
And
yeah. Dude, I'm obsessed with the book of Job right now because at the very end, Job, who had all these horrible things happen to him, right? I'm sure a lot of people know that.
yeah,
Um, he repents to God and just says, like, I'm sorry. Now I understand that there are things that are just truly too wonderful for me to know. And I think that's just like super powerful.
yeah.
Like real
Knowing that you could be on this road for 100 years, 1,000 years, and never even be remotely close to grasping all of God's knowledge, right?
right. And it just reminds me of my favorite quote, which is that life is not a problem to be solved, it's a mystery to be lived, right? I mean,
Boom.
it
I
wouldn't
love it.
even be fun if
It's
we
like
just
the
knew
life.
everything.
Yeah, it's about the journey, not the destination, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Because there is no destination. I mean,
Right.
there is, but if that's your focus, like it's a slippery slope, right?
Right. Well, yeah, because you start doing things for all the wrong reasons. If
Exactly.
everything's just to justify, you know, means to an end, then yeah, you're not living life. You're always just trying to get somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah, and it brings you back to the whole idea of living in the moment, you know?
Hmm.
There's
Hmm.
n it's no coincidence that it's called the present for a reason, right?
Right.
And that's the true gift, is
Hmm.
living in the moment.
Hmm.
Yeah, and anxiety and depression are just realizations of past and future, right?
Yep.
Yeah, so true. Yeah, so since we did hop off of it a little bit, I wanna get back to Tartaria,
Okay. Hey, do you
and
mind if I use the restroom super quick?
not I don't mind at all, no.
Okay, I'll be right back.
Yeah, I'm gonna do the same thing.
All right, I'm back.
Perfect timing. I needed to use the restroom as well.
Okay, cool.
Okay, so um, space and NASA is a stage prop.
Mhm.
I agree with you completely there. Similar concepts. It just all continually seems to go back manipulation of the human psyche, the obvious co-creative faculties involved with mankind, right? That we do shape our reality,
Mhm.
and the most important power they have is to control that shaping, essentially, right? The steering of the ship,
Yeah,
and they do this through not only music but media, you name it, right?
yeah. If they can shape your beliefs, they can dictate your actions, pretty much,
Right,
like how
and
you react to the world.
yes, yeah, and um, so yeah, I wanted to get back to just lightly touching on. I know you mentioned it already, but um, Tartaria and Hollow Earth and how these things related to kind of a new Atlantis, that they were the same thing, that it was perhaps the same program or this
Mhm.
same hive mind concept, right? And maybe
Mhm.
that is a program, and that these things keep that there's some kind of cataclysm or event, maybe God's wiping the slate, and this same consciousness or dark counterplayer, however you want to identify it as, the
Okay,
dark
so
tower,
yeah.
um, Lucifer, Satan, that is starting over from zero and rebuilding the same thing. What do you
R-
think the end goal of that is? Is it for the benefit of mankind and kind of that this reality is kind of a filter?
No, I mean, I just straight up believe that the dark forces, Satan, whatever you want to call him, Lucifer, just trying to go to war with God again.
Right.
Um, and yeah, so I'll get into Tartaria in a second, but like I said earlier, Egypt is supposedly, I think Plato said that it was supposedly a colony, a surviving colony of Atlantis, right? So
Absolutely.
right
Yeah.
there, so right there, you have Egypt continuing the Atlantean mysteries.
Yeah.
Egypt and Babylon, biblically, are the same thing. We know this, and but besides all that, we know Freemasonry is based on the Egyptian mysteries as well. A lot of these mystery schools,
Absolutely.
secret societies, are just obsessed with the Egyptian mythologies and stuff. And so I really believe that the one world language from Atlantis, Tower of Babel, is the same symbolic language that's been, I guess, like preserved through their symbolism throughout all of time.
Okay.
And so these symbols have been used by people like John Dee
Right. Yep.
to do ceremonies, and some of these ceremonies,
And the Enochian
yeah,
part
yes, which led to more advances in that direction to even get us closer to that one world language once again.
and
But yeah,
streamlining is, like you said, that technology is being used predominantly for efficiency, kind of a streamlining event
mm-hmm,
to get the language back to a singular language, and maybe not necessarily a spoken language, but the World Wide Web would be that singular language. You think the Enochian
yeah,
language?
yeah. And so I mean, you just look at a computer chip. A lot of these motherboards and computer chips look almost just like an Enochian sigil.
Yeah, and cities were built identically. I've
Mm-hmm.
posted on this a bunch in the past that um, Canton, China, looks just like the Emerald Tablets.
Okay, I've never seen that, but that's interesting.
I'll share the link with you after this. And that you get these people again going back, and not only that, it looked like a beehive,
Mm-hmm.
and the temple was at the top. And so I think, like you were saying, the honeycomb symbolism, the fractality of it all, right? Just like a circuit board, that it's all fractal. And God, or however you want to classify the lighter side. I mean, how would you define God? Because I asked you this, but we didn't really talk about it. Who or what is God to you, in
I
your
mean, I
opinion?
know it's not a popular opinion, but at this point, I believe it's just Jesus Christ.
Okay.
Like,
Eh,
not just. I mean, I don't mean just, but like, it's that simple to me.
Okay.
Um,
So, and who was Jesus to you then? Was he
it's just what the
reincarnated?
it's just
Was
what
he
the Word of God
physical?
says. No, I don't believe in reincarnation.
Okay. It's so fantastic you say that. I wanted to mention that, you know, me being somebody who predominantly posts newspapers and, has probably read more newspapers than anybody out there.
Yeah, I noticed that.
The earliest representation or stated report of the word reincarnation was demon possession.
Yeah, no, that makes sense to me. I think that people do have past life memories, but I
Yeah,
think that,
so
yeah,
in this
those are coming from
article,
another source.
yeah, this article is like the 1780s. So right after America started collecting what they called, their own collective newspapers. And these people were getting together and they had what were called shakers, these kind of shamanic type people who would dance convulsively, right? And then they would essentially, they were doing this, they wanted to speak to Washington, right? Washington
Okay.
came through, Muhammad. And that's how they were in their terms reincarnating
Oh my
these
gosh.
people.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
through yeah, and they're not talking to ghosts, like it's
right,
deceptive spirits, yeah.
exactly, and they weren't reincarnating in new bodies and coming back as in a new body, being birthed, adolescence, growing up, having some realization moment where, oh, I'm this person in this past life. They're flat out saying these people would dance and convulse and speak in tongues,
Yeah.
and then a spirit who would name themselves X, Y, or Z. Some of these popular people, right?
Wow. So that was reincarnation to
That
them.
was reincarnation in the late 1700s. It wasn't this new age thing.
And is that
Right?
how the Essenes were picturing it too?
I would imagine
Because
the
they were doing like
Essenes,
sex magic, right? And
right?
just
I,
weird
I would
stuff, yeah.
100%. And I think this connects again, kind of not only with the concept of the hive mind, um, what it is that the scrying mirrors and the black mirrors and the computer systems and all of these things are doing in the languages, but it's kind of um, a gateway, right? No, no coincidence. The first computer I ever had was a gateway.
Yeah, yeah. And
And had
isn't the symbol a cube?
it actually was just a cow, but it was black and white checkerboard. It became the cube.
Okay, okay.
Yeah, but it was
I
just a
do
cow, black and
I,
white.
I do want to finish my Tartaria thought though, just
Oh
so
yeah,
I'm
please. I'm
not ignoring
sorry.
it.
I'll ramble. So yeah, let's get back there.
No, yeah, you're completely fine. But like, I guess this won't be super detailed, but just the thought I had to share was that Tartary reminds me a lot of Tartarus, right?
Of course.
The Greek underworld,
Yep.
which is where the Titans were,
Banished.
banished to, yeah.
Yep.
And so the Bible also tells us that the Nephilim were, similar to the Titans, right? After the flood, they were all killed, but some of them still survived. And there's legends that they retreated to places underground, like Lovelock Cave. That's a real story. But, anyways, my thought is that when these Titans or Nephilim, after the Great Flood, retreated underground,
Mm-hmm.
that was Tartary or Tartarus, right?
Okay.
And yeah, there's even like this weird place in Italy called Tarquinia.
Mm-hmm.
Have you seen that place?
Of course. Yeah.
Yeah, they have that tomb of the blue demons, right?
Yep.
Which are the Delphian guides. It's all Atlantis stuff. It's the water spirits. So I mean, there's a whole lot to it. This is still fresh to me, but I just wanted to tell you that before I forgot.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I know you aren't too familiar with it, but a huge chunk of my archive work is about the underground.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
one of
It's all
my
the
favorite
underworld.
articles, yeah, that I read on THC was about this man who stumbles into basically a Shambhala in Colorado,
Mm.
and it's full of giants, thousands and thousands of
Yeah,
them,
yeah.
and it's a giant world where these people were living for years and years and years, thousands of years it seems, and perhaps this is post some event, the destruction of the tower, who knows.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, these cave systems lead to more than just people living in a cave. It's a
It's like the remains
monumental.
of that old utopia.
Absolutely, yeah, 100%. And you mentioned Lovelock, and I've talked a lot about that, and I've read just about every article you can find on Lovelock. But they described them as redheaded giants who had magical powers,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and that occasionally they were feeding on the locals.
Yeah.
Um, and that's why the Indians suffocated them in their cave.
Mm-hmm.
And you find a lot of these connections. Red-headed giants are everywhere; they're all over America. And yeah, I definitely get what you're saying about the Tartaria reference. I mean, this brings back the concept of Pluto, right? The ritual of Pluto and the discovery in stage, right? Because the space is the stage, it's the ether, right? And the ether is what things are written in. That's like the paper that the subconscious and the collective mind creates in.
Mm-hmm.
And as we've said, NASA is just kind of like the screenplay
Yeah.
that they put in front of us to create whatever it is they're trying to portray. And Pluto, is also the god of the underworld. Well, in the 1700s, Pluto was already talked about. So when they say Pluto was discovered and it was named Pluto in the 1900s, that's nonsense. But get this, the man who discovered it and first gave an orb the name Pluto, he said it was the inner sun.
Interesting.
Yeah, there was this.
Yeah, I have. That's like a super old book, right? Isn't it a science fiction book too?
I don't know, but this is written as completely
Okay.
nonfiction.
Okay.
And this astronomer basically said that there's some kind of inner Earth sun, and he named it Pluto, and that it affects the upper world's magnetic fields. And so I think that's why he named it Pluto. It goes back to the lodestone and the opposing magnetic fields and how these things create consciousness. And we're
Yeah.
talking
Well,
about two opposing worlds, right? Tartarus, the underworld, and
and
then
Babylon. Yeah. Sorry, just real quick.
yeah,
Babylon
please,
was worshiping the Queen of Heaven.
right,
And where do we get this hive mind symbol from? We get it from King David, right? The Star of David.
right,
But his dad was Solomon. Solomon was the guy that was the wisest man in the world, richest man in the world.
mm-hmm.
And he sadly fell away from God towards the end of his life because he had like 500 wives who were teaching him teaching him about their gods, which was he basically had the temple of God, right? And then he brought in these altars to different
Right, of
different
course.
demons and making the Queen of Heaven side by side with God. And so
This is
yeah,
this ties.
Masonry,
Go
sorry,
ahead,
what?
please. No, please.
Masonry, Templars, they all are, I talked to Masons before and they will straight up tell me like, yeah, we're students of Solomon's wisdom. So like it's all the continuation of this hive mind stuff. And what is at the bottom of the underworld, right? The Venusberg, that was where Aphrodite lived. What's, Vatican, in my opinion, is named after Vatica, the goddess of hell, the goddess of the underworld. And that's where that Tarquinia thing is nearby. So anyways, you have this light in the center of the earth that could be Lucifer, in my opinion. Like
Pluto,
that
yeah.
queen, yeah, that queen.
Yeah, so doesn't it make more sense that that was what they were naming Pluto?
Yeah,
The
yeah,
light of the
mm-hmm.
underworld, which is
Yeah,
what this astronomer was saying in the
yeah,
1700s.
yeah,
Not this tiny orb out in space, which again we've already kind of talked about. Both of our opinions are very much similar there on space being a stage prop.
yeah,
Yeah, and man, you just touched on so many great things there. Julian Jaynes describes Solomon, and Solomon, he says, it was a perfect representation of this bicameral period
mm-hmm.
because Solomon had no introspection at all. Solomon did what he was told by his inner voice. He didn't ponder the world. He didn't think about how do I make peace with these people or who do I love or any of that. The women he married, the kids he had, was all driven by a voice within him, an auditory hallucination. And that story you just said there perfectly represents the end of that auditory. He started to lose the voice of God, and that's when
Yeah,
he led
yeah.
all
Well,
these
he did.
idols into the temple. And
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
think that's perhaps literal, but I would say more metaphorical for the world we're living in now.
Well,
Right?
yeah, that's definitely happening today. All the
Yeah,
idols being allowed in the temple. I mean,
agreed.
you see people, supposedly Christians, speaking in tongues and doing all this crazy stuff, and I just don't think that's, you know, just for if anyone even is a Christian listening to this, like, in the end times, it says that, Jesus never talks about a giant revival happening, talks about a great apostasy,
Hmm.
so I think we're watching that happen too. And I would even say that some of this like resurgence in Tartaria, like the interest in it, right, is kind
Yeah,
of part of the echo chamber conspiracy I was talking about because like what
echo
was
chamber, perfect definition. I would say.
what was going on before Hitler took over the nation was an occult revival, right? Where
Yeah.
everyone's talking about Atlantis,
Yep.
everyone was a conspiracy theorist, no one trusted the people who would not be named. And that is exactly what's happening to our world today right now. I think we're literally being radicalized and set up for some kind of occult messiah to take over. And it could be
Donald Trump, honestly. I mean, his ties back to Tartaria, Tomorrowland, Tesla, the NIMSA stuff, it all is too crazy to me, you know?
Yeah. Well, and yeah, I agree completely. And man, now you have to listen to my THC episode because I touch on all of those things. Yeah, and powerful right there. I agree. I've talked about Trump and the moonshot stuff. I'm not going to say for or against. I just think anything's possible in
Well,
this world.
the crazy thing is that like the two different realities they siphoned us off into are like true and false at the same time.
Agreed.
Like
Yeah.
Trump is a fascist, but also if you hate Trump and like just mentioning his name makes you insane, then I don't like that either, you know?
Yeah.
And then the fact that QAnon was being called a Russian psyop, like I think it could have been. I mean,
Yeah.
Russia is where all of the Shambhala theosophy, freaking all of this new age stuff came from in the first place.
Blavatsky and
Yes.
Trump are related. Did you know that?
Nope, that just drives it home for me.
Yeah. Yeah, King Rurik.
And then you have Tesla coming over from that area too, you know, and then you have the Ingersoll Lockwood books that are written about time portals underneath the earth in Russia.
Yep.
Like,
yeah, you gotta listen to that episode because I talk it on Ingersoll. Yeah, I talk about how
he was a part of the Union of the Titans. You talk about that?
Yeah. No, I didn't talk about that, but I know that because me and you, that was probably one of our first
oh yeah, that's
in-depth conversations.
Yeah, and so the Titans are the Nephilim. These people are coming from the underground world. Yep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Hour and a half in, we get in our flow.
Yeah, the radium stuff is amazing, and I'll just move through it real quick because there's stuff about it that I haven't shared with you. So yeah, radium, right? It was first discovered in the 1800s, late 1800s. First experimented with in the early 1900s. Do I totally believe these dates? Probably not. But guess what? All the radium mining in the world was controlled by one group, and they called themselves the German Syndicate.
Of course.
And the first flying device written of in America was from California, and it used radium. And it connects with NIMSA, connects with Trump. And how? Well, the largest non-medical governmental purchaser of radium in America was the Ingersoll Watch Company. So you're dealing with Ingersoll, time traveling, right? Timepiece, the watch. Because radium is phosphorescent, right? So they were dipping the watch faces in radium and to make them glow at night, so you could still see the hands on the watch. But what I talked about on THC with Greg was that I've hypothesized you're dealing with these same people that me and you are mentioning now, right? So you're talking about, I think it's a direct relation to the Thule Society, right? Wouldn't you?
Yeah, I mean, they were looking for Hollow Earth, right?
Exactly. And then you got Ingersoll writing about Hollow Earth and time traveling Baron Trump.
Yeah.
Relating again to the NIMSA, where they're using radium in their electromagnetic anti-gravitic flying ships. And this goes back to what I hypothesized on his show, that the real push for World War I was you had these Thule dark magician, chaos magician people who were really the voices behind these different governments, and that they were fighting over radium and what they were really using it for. And it ties in with your MK Ultra stuff you've mentioned before. It has to do with the lodestone, because you can impart radium into lodestones. And it makes for which unfortunately we won't have enough time, but this will be part 2. We'll get into the Bet sphere. And what the Bet sphere really was, and that me and you talked lightly about this, that all these fires that were going on all over the world, the destruction of Moscow and destruction of St. Petersburg and the Chicago fire and San Francisco fire, and all these eyewitnesses seeing these balls of fire and how they were radiating heat, and people were losing their hair, and people were developing cysts and cancers and all of these things. I think it's directly related to the radium. But before we end, I want you to...
Can I say one last thing?
Oh, please. Yeah.
Just the fact that all these people were literally looking for the underworld, right?
Right.
I think it means that they were channeling a lot of the inspiration for their crazy adventures and mystical realizations. I think that was like inspired or channeled from the abyss. It's just like Nietzsche, dude. He stared too long at the abyss. He literally went insane.
Yeah,
Thought
the
he was
Black
the
Mirror
he
is
thought
the
he was
abyss.
the
Yeah.
Antichrist. He
Mhm.
literally was sending letters to the Pope saying, "I'm the Antichrist." And guess what he did? All the information he channeled was used to justify the Nazis, used to justify transhumanism, and used to justify accelerationism. Right? You know his quote: "If something's already falling, give it a push." This is what all these dark enlightenment technocrats are literally living by right now, trying to crash society as fast as possible just to get it over with because it's already happening anyways. And like I said, the Ubermensch is the transhuman, and the Nazis were the first people to try and do that. It's all underworld knowledge, dude. It's a fallen angel technology, and the fallen angels, I would argue, are fallen angels. That's why the sacred geometry, this weird, they are like mind viruses. They're informational life forms that live in these symbols, and that's
Yeah.
why we are. That's why they have been using us to mine the data to recreate this one world language in this Tower of Babel.
And it goes right back to what we were talking about with Philip K. Dick, and he says the same thing, that angels are angles and orthogonal time is right angle time. And
I
these are
did not
different
know that.
these are different worlds. That, like he said, that perhaps when Jesus said the kingdom of God is not within you, but it's among you or around you, and that he supposes the idea that God will come and that there will be a shift, and the people that are unaware or hive-minded, right?
Mhm.
These bicameral people who aren't even essentially self-aware. They're
Well, if you watch any movie right now, there's always like this weird theme, right? Like even if you watch The Yellow Submarine, right? Uh there is always like this group that like hates creativity, hates music, wants to turn life colorless and gray, right? It's almost like the hive mind. But then there's always this other group that's like, "Oh, we're artsy, we're bohemians, we're visionaries, whatever," and they save the day. I think that is what we're going to watch happen because they are exposing this. They're exposing the hive mind people right now
yeah.
through the revelation of the method. I think we're going to watch some kind of crazy fake spiritual revival that tries to take down this thing. And it will really be ushering in the actual new age of Aquarius, right? The thing that people have been primed for the past like decade, the golden age.
And remember,
Getting
like
back
we
to
were,
Gaia worship, Gaia would be the whore of Babylon, right? That's what Crowley called Babylon a manifestation of Gaia. So,
and so I think a perfect way now with that to end this segment would be the voice of God technology, right?
mhm.
Because we started off talking about how Julian Jaynes' main theory was that there was the Tower of Babel as a symbolism, as a symbol, sorry, and a metaphor, was this singular voice of God, that nobody had introspection, metaphor didn't exist. No one was, there
So
was no analog eye.
can I ask a
So
question about this?
yeah, please.
In order for this theory to work, though, does evolution have to be real, or like how would a cataclysm even cause the way we think to
It could have been
change?
God. It doesn't have to be a cataclysm. It could have been the destruction of the tower as a symbol. That perhaps
So because we are
you
all connected to a hive mind at one point, that fracturing has created the bicameral mind. Is that what you're saying?
no, the bicameral mind is pre-fracture. That's when everyone was a worker bee for the queen,
Okay.
and that
During the
through
Tower of
some of
Babel.
correct, correct, through some event like the Eye of Sauron, right?
Mm-hmm.
Remember how he's in the tower and he's controlling the orcs,
Mm-hmm.
right? Through telekinesis, right? He's controlling all the people. That's the same symbology, and the destruction of the tower by, as we were just mentioning, this um, force of God or kingdom of God. You know, what's the wizard's name from Lord of the Rings? The one opposing Sauron.
Gandalf.
Gandalf
Yeah.
symbolizes this, as well as also what we've talked about with Saturn, right? That time didn't exist essentially in the mind of the person because they weren't conscious.
Yeah.
So
Well, that's
time was
happening right now with the internet. We live in
right,
like an eternal
exactly. And
present. So
that's what I'm saying. We're going backwards, like you
yeah,
said.
yeah, yeah,
We're
yeah.
going back to that time period.
Mm-hmm.
And the voice of God technology, right?
Mm-hmm.
AI, the technology, Wi-Fi, EMF, all these things are taking back control of those susceptible enough or lost enough, however you want to describe it, weak enough, whatever the adjective is you want to use, that they don't have their own self-fulfillment. They're not on their own path, so they're easily manipulated. They're going to be pulled back into the hive, which they already have been. I mean, these last few years have shown that such a large percentage of the population is looking for anybody to give them the voice of God or tell them what to do, essentially. And that the black screens
Not
and
to be
all of these.
morbid, but part of me wonders if it was a eugenics experiment, because the Nazis, right? They are related to some of the people that were making those shots, right?
Yeah.
And I wonder if it was an IQ test, because that's how these people think. You know, you're talking about Lucius Trust. Well, they didn't believe in a dystopia. They thought that they were going to build a enlightened utopia filled with really smart people, similar to the Nazis, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And
So,
the Georgia Guidestones fall under the same philosophy.
yeah, so it would seem that it could have been a giant test.
Right. And so what do you think the Georgia Guidestone, the destruction of that symbolically?
Well, I've heard it described as burning a sigil to make it happen.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, you do that, of course. Yeah, you write it out and you burn it to manifest it.
I do find it weird, though, that they didn't really talk about it on the news, though.
I know, right? That's what I meant. There were a lot of strange things with that. If
Yeah.
it was a ritual, they did a horrible job of.
Have you heard my story about that thing?
Yeah, you were there, right?
Yeah. I don't even I don't know if that really played a role, but yeah, my friend and I were there. We literally prayed for them to be destroyed,
Yeah.
which is very
So
weird, but
my family grew up about an hour from there, and I've been there more than once. And
Alberta.
I actually have a piece of marble from the quarry where it was quarried. So
Yeah.
funny connection.
No, that is.
Yeah. But yeah, so to wrap this up, where I wanted to go back with that was you were saying essentially what I was saying, that we're essentially going back into this time frame with through the technology. The kind of lodestone is taking, like it's cooling the herd, but it's also drawing in its followers, right? Kind of strengthening its base.
Yeah.
And what I want before we call it here, and I hope we can come back for part 2, because man, we barely even covered not even half of this.
I still need to hear the Beth Sphere like in its entirety.
Oh, yeah. Well, we'll take that into cooling the herd as well. Tech, we'll tie that in with Tesla, because a lot of that technology Tesla was working on, whether or not he was an actual person. But the Trump connection is really important. We'll work that into the Philadelphia experiment.
FBI, they thought Tesla was an alien from Venus, right? A Venusian, the Luciferian false light. A lot of people think Tesla is like a hero. And so it would seem that if we do somehow come around to a new age that's filled with Tesla tech, that would seem like a good thing. And then
and that's, I think, one of the big follies of the Tartaria stuff is that this we're dealing with the hive mind again. The Tartaria, how did we build such big buildings? It was this golden age. It wasn't. You're dealing with a society that was completely manipulated through hive mind, I think. And how would you? Because I mean, you've seen it. You've seen these cities, right? We're taking people off the land, and you're putting them into a city. This ties in with egregores and thought forms and city states, and how all these people, the hive mind think, the hive think group, when you force everyone into this group, and then through EMF, which is what all these buildings were doing, right? They were producing large amounts of EMF, that you're dealing with the same thing that we're reproducing now. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah.
And I don't think that was, I think there could have been societies that were using it for good, sure. But I would say the majority of it, you're dealing with a populace that they're basically just drones.
Yeah.
Like when you look at like the Aztecs and the Mayans, the amount of labor necessary to build these monuments, right, is astronomical. And the only way it would make sense is if you had a populace that was like a colony of bees.
Right.
That's the only way it makes sense.
And that's the alchemical gold, the honey.
Yeah. And I think there is some inversions there, right? And that we're being steered away from that. And as I've heard you mention, and our mutual friend Cyclops, he was telling me that essentially steering the the group that are kind of self analytical, the higher IQ people that have kind of removed themselves from the system, essentially, right? The quote
Yeah,
system, trying to, that's kind of who they're after.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that these echo chambers,
They got to play all these games on them.
exactly,
Super multi-layered games, infinite games.
Yeah, infinite games. And I think to wrap it up, the key, well, I want you to answer this. I don't want to put words in your mouth. For me, not being polarized has been the most freeing thing for me. Truly being able to look and listen and hear things openly and honestly, but not necessarily allow them to impart anything upon me without careful consideration, right? And that, as you know, you've been on this journey for a long time, as have I, almost 20 years for me. The farther I get down, the more I want to be humble and realize that I'll never know everything. And it's not about ego or like knowing everything or like being the first to say something or have an opinion on something. That it's just about kind of the freedom of self-awareness, I guess, and not being affected. Again, the polarity thing. But I want for you to wrap it up, to just kind of tell me, in all the years you've been doing this, all your years of research, what has helped you feel the most content, surviving, thriving in this physical world that we inhabit?
Yeah, dude. I mean, I won't even lie to you. Like, the past 3 months have been some of the most peaceful, fulfilling times of my life, just because I've actually been taking the God of the Bible seriously, just reading and fasting and praying all the time. And this was something that I discovered along my path intellectually at first. Like, I think people will have a way better idea once I finally release this book, at least how I'm making sense of it, the things that I went through and the things that I'm using to justify why I think the Bible is the truth. I mean, I don't need to justify it. I really do think it's the truth. But at one point through all my research, I just kept coming back to Jesus, and I was like, okay, well, I accept him intellectually, so I'm going to go get baptized. And then my life became hell. Things got horrible. It got way worse. Like, just I'm not even gonna go into it, but I will. We could talk about the next time, or it'd be in my book too. But just like really demonic, creepy things. I was afraid for my life. And yeah, so like once I finally started practicing what I thought I believed, I started actually believing it with my heart, not just my mind, and it gave me peace, and just amazing things have been happening. Just like prayers will seemingly be answered. Like, just things are changing so rapidly. And
what's some advice you can give to the listeners on how to have some of that peace? Or
well, yeah, so it all started for me when I was like, okay, I'm just gonna do the most extreme thing I can think of. And at first I thought it was like, so dude, there's like, it's so crazy and it's unfortunate how, like, even if you start believing in the so-called truth, you get into the Bible and stuff, there's deception even in that. Like, I thought as soon as I left the conspiracy community, I was just going to be like left alone by that kind of stuff. But no, there's all these different, I forgot apparently that there's all these different denominations, all these different false teachers, all these different things. And there's even people teaching others how to get delivered of demons and all this nonsense. And it really just makes your condition worse. Like, I was talking to some guy, he did some weird prayer to me. I felt like crap for 3 days. And then I was like, all right, I'm not doing that again. I figured, I'm working on an essay right now of like logically why I think that's wrong. I mean, anyways, I just prayed and fasted and I felt better. But the very first time that I felt this peace was, I was like, I need to do the most extreme thing possible, which was fasting for a few days. And then I actually, and reading the Bible at the same time. So I was just reading about fasting. In the book of Jeremiah, it talks about how to taste real freedom, in the desert, which I felt like I was in a spiritual desert for a very long time. You fast. And so that's what I did. And yeah, my life has, I mean, I've fasted before, but not for those reasons. Right. So I think that's what changed. And yeah, so I mean, my advice is just like be in the world, but not of it. Don't get wrapped up in the polarization.
Yeah, I love that. And I had Matthew chapter 4, verse 1 through 11 brought up because that was something I wanted to get into as well.
What
Um,
is that part?
and I think I'll read this if that's okay, and we'll finish off with
That's
this.
totally okay. If it's do not worry, I'm going to which verse is it?
Matthew, verse 4.
No, I
Or
mean like
chapter. Oh,
yeah.
here, I'll just start in. Okay.
Okay, yeah,
Jesus
yeah.
tested in the wilderness is what it is.
Oh, okay.
Right. And this is,
Mhm.
and then we can talk about quarantine in 40 days. And perhaps this world that we're in is quarantine, a kind of bardo. And that when Christ came in to the desert, that we're in the desert. We live in the desert. Christ came into the desert for 40 days. He was quarantined. And the idea of fasting and removing the spirits, the parasites, the mind virus
Mhm.
relates to
Mhm.
fasting.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think Jeremiah and Matthew are two of my favorites. So I'll read this, and then part 2 of my talk with you will start right in with mind virus, fasting, um, the metaphors and the parables that Jesus speaks in, the
Mhm.
path, knowledge, finding yourself, being tempted by the devil.
Mhm.
That'll be like our entryway into part 2. But I'll just read this. So yeah, this is Matthew chapter 4, verse 1 through 11. Then Jesus was led by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. After fasting 40 days and 40 nights, he was hungry. The tempter came to him and said, "If you are the Son of God, tell these stones to become bread." Jesus answered, "It was written, man shall not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of God." Then the devil took him to the holy city and had him stand on the highest point of the temple. "If you are the Son of God," he said, "throw yourself down, for it is written, He will command his angels concerning you, and they will lift you up in their hands, so that you will not strike your foot against a stone." Jesus answered him, "It is also written, do not put the Lord your God to the test." Again, the devil took him to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their splendor. All this I will give you," he said, "if you will bow down and worship me." Jesus said to him, "Away from me, Satan, for it is written, worship the Lord your God and serve him only." Then the devil left him, and the angels came and attended him.
Yeah.
I think that's a great verse and a
Yeah, no, it's
perfect.
awesome.
It's kind of a cliffhanger.
Yeah, yeah.
I hate to leave the listeners there, but I want you guys. I said it, Matthew chapter 4, verse 1 through 11. Read that line for line and kind of take in what me and Nick have been saying.
Another one. Yeah, I thought you were about to read to me the one I was going to bring up a verse from Matthew earlier, so people want to look. Do not worry is one of my favorite ones right now.
One
But
of
yeah,
my favorites as well. But
I love the
we've
idea
talked.
for the next podcast though.
Yeah. We've talked about the lodestone.
Mhm.
We've talked about Julian Jaynes, the inner voice, the inner hallucination, the word of God, the voice of God, the Tower of Babel, that voice being lost, people being lost in the wilderness, lost in the desert, right?
Mhm.
And feeling those emotions that come with introspection, the analog eye, um, having to find your own way in the world, as we were just saying,
Mhm.
when we started this talk. And yeah, lots left on the table. Um, Fantastic conversation. Thank you again so much for being here. Also, in part 2, we're gonna have to get into Wormwood
Yeah,
and
yeah.
Chernobyl.
Yeah.
I want to read you some more of
Bottomless
that.
pit.
The bottomless pit. I want to read you some more of that language crystal book
Yeah.
and get your takes on some of that because I think you're really gonna love it. And yeah, so we gave the people a lot to chew on.
Yeah.
Whew, fantastic, Nick. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, dude, thank you for having me. I really appreciate all the time you took with those notes, man.
Yeah, and we didn't even go into not even close to half of it, which is obvious. That's going to happen in a narrow time frame here. But and then we can talk, as I stated, we'll get into the quarantine, um, why that was such a powerful word
Mhm.
shell that was used when we, with the whole pandemic,
Mhm.
quarantine, Jesus in the desert, 40 days, mind virus, parasite, work that into the wormwood, Chernobyl. Yeah. So again, thank you, Nick, so much. Tell the people where they can find you.
Just NICKHINTONN on Twitter and Instagram.
And ETA, if there is one for the third book, which I'm really looking forward to.
This month is my goal.
Really?
Yes.
Sweet.
I mean, it's practically done. It's literally done.
The original beginning of the calendar. Start the year off right in March.
Oh yeah. Okay, that's fitting.
Yeah, it's the original first month. We've talked about Janus a little bit, and January was created, so Janus could be the first month, even though it was originally March.
February and March also just seem like the most trickster time of year to me because 23, 2-3, 23. It's like
February for sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
But I don't really care about the trickster anymore. I'm a good Christian boy. But yeah, thank you, man. I appreciate it. This is fun talk.
Yeah. We didn't get too weird.
No, I don't think so.
Yeah. And I can't wait to do it again. And I'll have your Twitter and your Instagram in the description. I'll also link your Ko-fi site where people can get your books, correct?
Yes.
And your third book, what's the title? Do you have the title?
The New World Disorder.
The New World Disorder. I love it. And that'll be available on your Ko-fi as well?
Yeah, that'll be up on there once it's out.
Perfect. And end of the month-ish, maybe beginning of April?
Yeah, around that period. And I might actually release. So I have 3 books in the works. I'm constantly doing this to myself, but I started a whole new thing. But anyways, it doesn't matter. Yeah, The Stairway to Sirius, New World Disorder, and this third project.
That's what I heard. I heard the Stairway to Sirius one.
Yeah.
We'll have to talk a little bit about that in the part 2 that we do.
Yeah, that one's basically my testimony of going insane, seeing a bunch of terrifying things, and then finding God.
Okay. Love it. Yep. Thank you so much, Nick, for being here. And everybody, check him out. Instagram, Twitter, and I'll have all the links in the description. And stay tuned for his third book. Hopefully we can get him back on after that book, and then we'll have even more to talk about.
Yes, sir.
Take it easy, guys.
Later.